time to repent from their sins. And God told Abraham that in the fourth generation, his descendants, Abraham's descendants, that will be settling in Egypt, will be going back to Canaan to claim the land of Canaan for as their possession. It says here, will live with them without destroying their evil practices. They will be tempted to do what these people were doing. So we are told that during the time of Joshua, they killed those inhabitants of Canaan. And the promise was God will give them rest after they get rid of those inhabitants who were practicing evil things in the sight of God. And the question is, did they find rest after the promise? So the concept here is God will give them rest after they purge the land from its inhabitants. And this rest is God's rest and also the weekly Sabbath rest. Now, by the way, we have already learned this from our previous study in previous quarters about what the meaning is in observing the Sabbath. How do we relate if we keep the Sabbath? What are we like remembering? Anybody who could remember our past lessons? What does Sabbath worship, Sabbath observance, keeping the Sabbath remind us of? There's two. Okay, creation. That's where can we find it? Genesis, and also specifically the Ten Commandments in Exodus 20, 8 to 11, about the Sabbath. Second, what else? As what Moses re-emphasized in Deuteronomy chapter 5. Deliverance from Egypt, from slavery. Are we still slave today? Yes. Slave from what? Slave from sin. So as we keep the seventh-day Sabbath, we are reminded of what God has done for us. He created us, and at the same time, through the death of Jesus, He redeemed us from the power of sin. That is, if we think of the spiritual aspect of keeping the Sabbath, not the legalistic way, where we're only particular of the time that the Sabbath is with us, that, okay, we should not do this, we should not do that. If we see a friend or other church member or doing this or that, we are fast to condemn, like what the Pharisees were doing in the days of old. So it's our commitment, or it's our realization that the Sabbath, the weekly Sabbath, brings to us a remembrance of creation, and also keeping us to be aware that Jesus had redeemed us from the power of sin through His death at Calvary. God connected the Sabbath of creation with the deliverance from Egypt. He instructed Israel to observe the Sabbath as a memorial of creation and as a memorial of their redemption from Egypt. Creation and redemption are both enshrined in the Sabbath commandment. Are there any questions for Sunday's lesson? The land as a place of rest. The land as a place of rest. If there's no any question, then we'll proceed to Monday's lesson, because of unbelief. Now, we are familiar here with the children of Israel, right? When they were in the border of Canaan, in particularly in Kadesh Barnea. This is being recorded in Numbers 13 and 14. Spies were sent to spy the land. And we all knew that out of the 12 spies, only 2 gave a positive report. Although what the other spies reported were true, right? They reported that the land is abundantly rich. They describe it as a land flowing with milk and honey. That means that the produce of the land is really good. It's great. They reported that the cities or the nations occupying the land are strong people with high walls, hard to penetrate. Was of no value to them because they did not share the faith of those who obeyed. Israel traveled to the borders of the promised land as a people. When the people were faced with contradictory reports, they identified with those who lacked faith. Faith or lack of it is contagious. And because of this, only Caleb and Joshua, those who were 20 and above, were able to enter the land of Canaan. All of them died in the wilderness because of the lack of faith. So, there's a question here. Brother Thomas?
Since God created the earth, the foundation of the earth, and he rested on the Sabbath day, how come vegetation is not resting, the birds are not resting, the seas are not resting, the flowers still bloom? Why all these is not resting?
Okay, that's a good question. Why is it that creation goes on without any rest as we see it? So God sees doing his creative work, but actually, as our lesson mentioned, he did not totally cease from doing those, we could say, maintenance things or routine things. And it's only God stopped or rested in what he was doing. And because creation was finished in 6 days, on the 7th day he rested, and he instituted the Sabbath as a day of rest. He blessed it, they worship on the Sabbath, and he hallowed it. Okay, so, or comment, or keep the Sabbath. The question is, they define true rest or God's rest. Now, in just this lesson, it mentioned here about if you hear his voice today, and we know that the word today here is repeated several times by Paul in chapters 3 and 4. I think he repeated it or emphasized it about